Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever heard something talking to you from inside a wall? The question hung in the stale air of the Desert Mirage Motel office as the night clerk handed me the key to room 17. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes, they lingered on mine a moment too long. I laughed nervously. That's quite a greeting. Just wondering, he said, sliding the metal key across the counter with fingers stained yellow from cigarettes. Room 17's at the far end. Last one on the right. Don't mind the highway noise. The red neon sign outside buzzed and flickered, casting an intermittent crimson glow through the dusty blinds. It was almost midnight, and I had been driving for 14 hours straight. My eyes burned from the long stretch of Texas highway, and my back ached from being hunched over the steering wheel. All I wanted was a shower and a bed. Is there something wrong with the room? I asked, my hand hovering over the key. The clerk shook his head, a little too quickly. Nah. Just some guests have vivid imaginations after long drives. Brain plays tricks when you're tired. I pocketed the key and dragged my suitcase across the cracked parking lot to room 17. The motel was a single-story horseshoe of rooms facing an empty pool filled with brown rainwater and dead leaves. Only 3 other cars occupied the lot, all parked far from my assigned room. The key stuck in the lock, requiring a specific jiggle before the door swung open with a prolonged creak. The smell hit me first, musty carpet and cheap air freshener trying to mask something older, something embedded in the walls. I fumbled for the light switch. A single bed with a faded floral comforter. A dresser with a boxy television. A bathroom door ajar, revealing the edge of a stained porcelain sink. Standard cheap motel fare. But something felt off. I couldn't name it yet, just the slightest prickle at the back of my neck, like someone had blown gently across my skin. The wallpaper, once white with blue flowers, had yellowed with age. In places, it bubbled away from the wall, as if something behind it was pushing outward. When I set my suitcase down, the thud seemed to echo, but not in the way sound normally travels. It was as if the walls absorbed the noise and then released it back in waves. I told myself it was just the unusual acoustics of the small room, the thin walls, the empty space. I sat on the edge of the bed, and the springs protested loudly. The highway hummed in the distance, punctuated by the occasional passing truck. Everything felt both perfectly normal and subtly wrong. The air conditioner chugged to life with a mechanical wheeze, startling me. Cold air spilled from the unit, carrying with it the scent of dust and mildew. I stood and walked to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry insect. The mirror reflected a face I barely recognized, pale, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes. 36 hours without proper sleep will do that to you. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to ignore the rust-colored stain around the drain. That's when I heard it. A soft scratching sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across paper. I turned off the faucet and listened. The sound stopped. Just the pipes, I muttered to myself. Old buildings make noise. They settle. They breathe. I stripped down and stepped into the shower. The water pressure was surprisingly good, though the temperature fluctuated between scalding and freezing without warning. I tried to let the water wash away the tension in my shoulders, the unease that had settled in my stomach. With my eyes closed under the shower spray, the acoustics changed. And through the hiss of water, I heard what sounded like a whisper. Here. My eyes snapped open. I turned off the shower and stood dripping and naked, listening intently. Nothing but the distant highway and the rattling air conditioner. I dried off quickly, suddenly feeling exposed. Back in the main room, I pulled on a t-shirt and shorts for sleeping. The digital clock on the nightstand read 12:17 a.m. I pulled back the covers, inspecting the sheets for any signs of bed bugs before sitting down. The bed faced the wall with the door. To my right was the bathroom. To my left, the wall shared with room 16. Behind me, the exterior wall facing the back lot and the desert beyond. I switched off the lamp and lay down in the darkness. Sleep wouldn't come. Every sound seemed amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing on the highway, the tick-tick-tick of something in the walls that I told myself was just the building cooling down for the night. I must have dozed off eventually because I jerked awake suddenly, disoriented. The clock read 3:24 a.m. Something had woken me. A sound. I lay perfectly still, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. The red neon from the motel sign filtered through the thin curtains, pulsing like a heartbeat. There it was again. A scratching sound, coming from inside the wall to my left. I told myself it was mice. Or cockroaches. This wasn't exactly a 5-star establishment. But then the scratching became more deliberate, more rhythmic, almost like Morse code, or words being etched into the wall, letter by letter. And then, unmistakably, a voice. I know you're awake. The words came through the wall, not from the adjoining room, but from inside the wall itself. A whisper, hoarse and dry, like someone whose throat was filled with dust. I can hear you breathing. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The rational part of my brain insisted that someone was in the next room, that the walls were simply thin enough to carry sound in strange ways. But the voice didn't sound like it was being muffled by drywall and insulation. It sounded like a mouth was pressed directly against the other side of the wallpaper, inches from my ear. Let me out, it whispered. Please, let me out. I fumbled for the lamp, my fingers trembling so badly I knocked the clock to the floor. When the light finally came on, I stared at the wall. The faded blue flowers on the wallpaper seemed to be moving, just slightly, as if something was breathing behind them. And there, along the seam where the wall met the ceiling, a new tear in the paper, about 6 inches long. A tear that hadn't been there when I checked a room earlier. A tear that looked remarkably like it had been made by fingernails. From the inside. I didn't sleep again that night. How could I? Every creak, every subtle shift in the building's foundation sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through my veins. I sat upright in bed, back pressed against the headboard, eyes fixed on that tear in the wallpaper. The lamp remained on, my only ally against the darkness that seemed to pulse with malicious intent. By 4:30 in the morning, I had convinced myself I'd hallucinated the voice. Sleep deprivation can do strange things to a person's mind. I was exhausted, stressed from the cross-country drive, and my brain had manufactured a horror to match my unease. That was the rational explanation. Yet I couldn't stop staring at that tear. When gray light finally began to seep through the curtains, I dressed quickly and fled the room, not even bothering to shower. The morning air hit my face like a blessing, cool, clean, devoid of that musty smell that permeated room 17. The same clerk from the night before was still at the desk, his face even more haggard in the dawn light. His name tag read Doug. "Checking out already?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "You paid for 2 nights. I hesitated. In the light of day, my fears seemed childish, overblown. And I was exhausted. The thought of finding another motel, checking it all over again. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked instead of answering. Doug's eyes flickered, just for a moment. "Like what?" "Like voices. Coming from the walls." He didn't laugh as I expected. He didn't dismiss me. He just stared, his expression unreadable. "Room 17 has thin walls," he finally said. "Highway noise plays tricks." This wasn't highway noise. It sounded like someone was inside the wall, talking to me. Doug sighed, shoulders slumping. He glanced around the empty office, then leaned forward across the counter. "Look," he said, voice low. "I'm not supposed to talk about this. Owner says it's bad for business." My skin prickled. "Talk about what?" "Some guests, they'd mention things. Hearing stuff. Seeing scratches appear overnight." He rubbed his stubbled chin. "Started about 6 months ago, after the renovations." "What renovations?" "New wallpaper, some structural work. Place was falling apart. Owner got some contractor who'd work cheap. Real cheap." He shook his head. "Didn't ask too many questions, if you know what I mean." A truck horn blared on the highway, making me jump. Doug didn't react. "I work nights," he continued. "Sometimes I hear things. Walking the hallways, checking the perimeter. Like someone's trapped somewhere, calling out." I felt cold despite the Texas morning heat beginning to build. "Why don't you investigate? Call someone?" Doug laughed, a hollow sound. "Who would I call? Police? Hey officer, I think my walls are haunted." "Yeah, that'd go over well." He shook his head. "Besides, I've looked. Tapped the walls, checked the crawl spaces. Nothing there. Nothing that makes sense, anyway." "Has anyone else stayed in room 17 recently?" "Not for more than 1 night," he admitted. "Most people check out early, like you're thinking of doing." Few mention why. I glanced back toward my room, barely visible at the end of the row. "I need coffee. Is there anywhere nearby?" Doug pointed across the highway. "Diner opens at 6. Best coffee in 3 counties." I nodded, already backing toward the door. "I'll think about whether to stay another night." "Your choice," Doug said. "But if you do stay..." He hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a small cardboard box. "Take this." Inside was an old tape recorder, the kind with the red record button and tiny built-in microphone. "I've been trying to catch it," he explained. "The voice. Never when I'm listening, though. Only catches people off guard." I stared at the recorder, then back at Doug. "You believe something's really there?" It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "I don't know what to believe anymore. But 17's the worst room. Whatever it is, it's hungriest there." I took the recorder and headed across the highway to the diner, my appetite gone but desperate for caffeine and normalcy. The waitress didn't look twice at my disheveled appearance, probably used to road-weary travelers looking like they'd seen ghosts. Over 3 cups of coffee, I debated with myself. The rational option was to leave, find another motel, write this off as a strange experience. But something kept nagging at me, not just curiosity, but a strange sense of responsibility. If something was there, trapped somehow. By the time I paid my bill, I had made my decision. I would stay one more night. But this time, I'd be prepared. I drove to the nearest Walmart and bought batteries for the tape recorder, a flashlight, and on impulse, a small utility knife. Back at the motel, I saw Doug getting into his car, presumably heading home after his shift. He gave me a knowing nod as we passed each other. Room 17 looked innocent in the daylight. Shabby, yes. Outdated, certainly. But not menacing. The tear in the wallpaper was still there, though it seemed smaller somehow, less significant. I placed the tape recorder on the nightstand and hit record, then did a slow circuit of the room, tapping methodically on the walls, listening for any hollow spots or unusual resonance. Nothing stood out. I examined the tear more closely, even carefully inserting the edge of the utility knife to see if there was anything unusual behind the paper. Just regular drywall, as far as I could tell. Exhaustion finally caught up with me around noon. Despite my best intentions to stay vigilant, I fell into a deep sleep on top of the covers, still fully dressed, the utility knife on the nightstand beside me. I dreamed of being trapped in a narrow space, barely wider than my shoulders. In the dream, I clawed at smooth surfaces all around me, my fingernails breaking and bleeding as I struggled to break free. I could hear people on the other side of the wall, walking, talking, living, but no one could hear my screams. When I woke, the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. The air conditioner had stopped running, leaving the room uncomfortably warm and still. The silence felt heavy, expected. The tape recorder was still running, its tiny spools turning steadily. I stopped it and rewound, then pressed play. For the first hour, there was nothing but my movements around the room, my methodical tapping, then the deep breathing of sleep. Then came a sound that made my skin crawl, a slow, deliberate scratching. It continued for several minutes, stopped, then started again. And then, clearly, a voice. Different from the night before, higher pitched, almost childlike, but with the same dusty quality. "Are you listening?" it whispered. "I can see you sleeping. You look peaceful." I remember peaceful. I nearly dropped the recorder. "They put us in here," the voice continued, so faint I had to strain to hear it. "Between the walls. Said it was cheaper than proper burial. Said no one would know." There was a long pause, filled only with that scratching sound. "I'm so hungry," the voice whispered finally. "So very hungry. For air. For light. For company." Another pause. "Let me out. Please, let me out. I'll do anything. I'll give you anything. Just tear down the wall." The voice fell silent, and for the next 20 minutes, there was nothing on the tape but my own breathing. I stopped the playback, hands shaking. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't highway noise or pipes or the building settling. Something, someone, was behind that wall. As the sun began to set, I faced a choice: leave now, while there was still light, or stay and confront whatever spoke from within the walls of room 17. The tear in the wallpaper seemed to widen as I watched, the edges curling inward like beckoning fingers. Night was coming, and whatever was trapped in the walls was getting impatient. The sunset bled crimson through the thin curtains, painting room 17 in shades of red that reminded me too much of something vital and spilled. I paced the small space, alternating between rationality and terror with each turn. It can't be real. But I heard it. Old buildings make strange noises. But it spoke words. Coherent thoughts. Maybe I'm having a breakdown. But it's on the tape. I didn't imagine that. As darkness settled, I prepared for another sleepless night. I positioned the flashlight and utility knife within easy reach and set the tape recorder to record again. The red rec light glowed like a tiny eye watching me from the nightstand. I tried the television, hoping noise would drown out any voices, but the ancient set produced only snow and static on most channels. The single clear station was playing an old western, the sounds of gunshots and horses' hooves somehow making the room feel even more isolated. Around 9, I heard a knock at my door. My heart leapt into my throat. I approached cautiously, utility knife in hand, and peered through the peephole. Doug stood outside, no longer in his uniform but in jeans and a faded t-shirt. I opened the door crack, chain still latched. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I heard it. On the recorder. His eyes widened slightly. What did it say? I hesitated, then opened the door to let him in. The room felt even smaller with 2 people. It said they put us in the walls, I explained, keeping my voice low as if the thing might be listening. Said it was cheaper than proper burial. Doug sank onto the edge of the bed, looking both vindicated and horrified. Jesus Christ. You think there are people on the walls? Even saying it aloud felt absurd. I don't know, he admitted. But when they did the renovations, they worked fast. Too fast. And at night, mostly. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. There were rumors about the contractor. That he used undocumented workers. That some of them disappeared. A chill ran through me. You think they're entombed in here somehow? Or something that wants us to think that? Doug looked around nervously. I've worked night shift at 6 different motels. Places get reputations, stories. Sometimes it's just stories. This doesn't feel like just a story. No, he agreed. It doesn't. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint dialogue from the television. Why'd you come back? I finally asked. After your shift ended? Doug's expression was hard to read in the dim light. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about you in here alone. He paused. And about what you might find. I'm not planning to tear down the walls, if that's what you're worried about. Are you curious, though? His eyes met mine. To know for sure what's in there? Before I could answer, the scratching started again. Louder this time. Deliberate. Coming from the wall behind the headboard. Doug froze, his face draining of color. You hear that? I nodded, unable to speak. We both turned to stare at the wall. The scratching moved, traveling upward, then across the ceiling, then down the wall near the bathroom. Like something was crawling around inside the narrow space between the walls, circling us. It's never done that before, Doug whispered. Never moved like that. The television suddenly blurred with static, the picture dissolving into snow. The lights flickered, once, twice, then stabilized. Let us out. The voice came from everywhere at once, not just one wall, but all of them. Not one voice, but many, layered over each other in a horrible chorus. Men, women, even what sounded like children, all speaking the same words with the same desperate intensity. let us out. The tear in the wallpaper suddenly split further, running from ceiling to floor in one violent rip, like someone had taken a razor to it from the inside. Doug jumped to his feet. We need to go. Now. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by what I could see through the tear, not the expected wooden studs and insulation, but a narrow, dark space. And within that darkness, the faintest suggestion of movement. There's something there, I whispered, raising the flashlight with trembling hands. Something actually there. Don't, Doug warned, but it was too late. I switched on the beam and directed it toward the tear. The light illuminated a sliver of the space between the walls. Dust motes danced in the beam, swirling as if disturbed by breath or movement. And there, just barely visible, what looked like fingers, thin, gray, with too many joints, curled around the edge of the torn paper. Doug made a strangled sound. Oh God! The fingers began to pull at the tear, widening it gradually. The wallpaper bulged outward as something pressed against it from the other side. We need to leave, Doug said, his voice breaking. He grabbed my arm. Right now. This time I didn't resist. We backed toward the door, eyes fixed on the widening tear. I fumbled behind me for the doorknob. It wouldn't turn. It's locked, I said, panic rising in my throat. That's impossible. It doesn't lock automatically. Doug pushed me aside and tried himself, twisting and pulling with increasing desperation. It's stuck. Like something's holding it from the other side. A low moan emanated from within the walls, rising in pitch and volume until it became a chorus of agonized wails. The wallpaper began to bulge in other places, by the television, near the bathroom door, above the air conditioner, as if dozens of hands were pressing outward. The window, I gasped, already moving toward it. But as we reached the window, the curtains suddenly whipped inward, though there was no breeze. They wrapped around Doug's face and neck like living things, twisting and tightening. He clawed at them, eyes wide with terror. I slashed at the fabric with my utility knife, finally freeing him. He fell to his knees, gasping and clutching his throat. They're not ghosts, he choked out. There's something else. Something worse. The moaning from within the walls changed tenor, becoming almost like chanting. Words I couldn't quite make out, in a language that hurt my ears. The tear by the bed had widened enough now that I could see more than just fingers. What emerged was a hand, or something hand-like, with skin the color and texture of old paper. It groped blindly in the air, searching. The bathroom, Doug wheezed, staggering to his feet. Maybe we can break through the window in there. We stumbled toward the bathroom door, but just as we reached it, every light in the room went out simultaneously. The television screen died. Even the neon sign outside stopped casting its red glow through the curtains. Perfect darkness. In that darkness, I heard Doug scream, a sound cut terribly short. Something warm splashed against my face. I fumbled with the flashlight, finally managing to switch it on. The beam caught Doug suspended against the wall, his body held spread-eagled by dozens of those paper-gray hands emerging from tears in the wallpaper. His eyes were wide, his mouth working silently. Blood trickled from where sharp, over-jointed fingers dug into his flesh. "Run," he mouthed. I backed away, the flashlight beam shaking violently in my grip. More tears were appearing in the wallpaper, more hands emerging. The air filled with a dry rustling sound, like thousands of sheets of paper being crumpled simultaneously. My back hit the main door. I turned and attacked it with the utility knife, stabbing at the wood around the lock, crying desperately. The moaning behind me grew louder, hungrier. Something cold brushed against my neck. I whirled to see the hands, dozens of them now, reaching for me from all sides. The beam of my flashlight caught something emerging from the whitest hair, a face, or what had once been a face, paper thin and colorless, with black holes where the eyes should be. It opened its mouth, a tear widening in the parchment of its skin, and whispered, "Stay with us." Between the walls. Forever. The utility knife finally splintered the wood around the lock. I threw my body against the door, felt it give way, and tumbled out into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, fumbled the keys into the ignition, and peeled out of the parking lot with the door barely closed. In my rearview mirror, room 17 looked perfectly ordinary. The lights were on. The door was closed, as if nothing had happened at all. But in the back seat, unnoticed until I was miles down the highway, sat my duffel bag. And beside it, the tape recorder, still running. I drove until dawn broke over the flat Texas horizon, until my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel and my gas tank light blinked insistently. Only then did I pull into a truck stop, choosing a spot under the harsh fluorescent lights, as far from shadows as possible. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My clothes were splattered with what could only be Doug's blood, now dried to a rusty brown. I couldn't process what had happened, what I'd seen. The human mind isn't built to accommodate such horrors. It tries to rewrite them, to make them fit into a world of reason and natural law. But the tape recorder sat on the passenger seat, a silent witness. I hadn't dared play it back yet. Part of me wanted to throw it out the window, to pretend none of it had happened. But I knew I wouldn't. Just as I knew I would eventually press play. First, I changed clothes in the truck stop bathroom, scrubbing Doug's blood from my skin under the lukewarm water. My reflection in the spotted mirror looked haunted, eyes sunken and wild. I barely recognized myself. Back in the car, I stared at the recorder for a long time before finally hitting rewind, then play. It started with Doug's arrival. Our conversation, word for word. The tension in our voices already evident even before anything happened. Then the scratching sounds, the voices from all sides. "Let us out." I shuddered, my skin crawling at the remembered chorus. Then came the sounds of struggle, the window, the curtains, our desperate attempts to escape. Doug's scream, cut short. My frantic efforts with the utility knife. And then, something I hadn't been aware of in my panic. After I fled, after the door slammed behind me, the recorder captured a conversation. He got away. A voice like paper tearing. "It doesn't matter. We have this one." Another voice, deeper, like stones grinding together. "Not enough. Never enough. Need more." A third, high and childlike. "The walls are so tight. No room to move. No room to breathe." The first voice again. "We were promised freedom. If we helped with the building. If we stayed quiet." The deep voice. "He lied. The contractor lied." The child's voice, breaking with emotion. "We will get out. One piece at a time. One body at a time." The sound of something wet and heavy being dragged. "Put him in the corner. With the others." Then a new voice, weak, gurgling, barely recognizable as human. "Doug. Please, where are you? Oh God, no. Please." Sounds I cannot, will not, describe. Doug's voice rising in agony, then fading to whimpers, then silence. After that, nothing but a soft, rhythmic noise, like breathing. Or waiting. I sat in the truck stop parking lot, nausea washing over me in waves. Doug was dead. Worse than dead. Taken by whatever lived between the walls of the Desert Mirage Motel. And I had run. Left him there. But what could I have done? What could anyone do against something that defied explanation, that seemed to control the very structure of the building? I should go to the police, I thought. Play them the tape, tell them what happened. They would think I was insane. Or worse, that I had done something to Doug myself. There was blood on my clothes. My fingerprints in room 17. No body, no evidence of a struggle if those things could manipulate the physical environment the way they had seemed to. No, the police weren't an option. But I couldn't do nothing. More people would stay in that room. More people would hear the whispers, see the tears in the wallpaper, face what waited between the walls. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The contractor. The renovations. That seemed to be the key. I found a library in the next town and used their computer to search for information about the Desert Mirage Motel. There wasn't much, a few bad reviews complaining about the usual issues with budget accommodations. No mysterious disappearances, no reports of hauntings. But when I searched for construction companies in the area, focusing on those that might have been hired for cheap renovations, I found something. A small outfit called Borderlands Construction, run by a man named Victor Mercer. They'd been cited multiple times for safety violations, and there were rumors about their hiring practices. Most interestingly, they declared bankruptcy 6 months ago, right around the time Doug said the disturbances at the motel began. I dug deeper. Found a local news article about 3 undocumented workers who had gone missing from a Borderlands construction site. Their families had reported them missing, but without documentation or clear evidence of foul play, the investigation had stalled. The article didn't name the construction site, but the timing matched. As evening approached, I faced a decision. I could keep driving, try to forget what I'd seen, live with the knowledge that I'd left Doug behind and that others would suffer the same fate. Or I could go back. The sensible choice was clear. Only a fool would return to that motel, to that room, knowing what waited there. But I kept thinking about the voices on the tape. We were promised freedom. If we helped with the building. If we stayed quiet. What if they weren't monsters, but victims? What if Mercer had done something to them, trapped them somehow, and they were lashing out from a place of pain and desperation? I couldn't justify what they'd done to Doug. But I couldn't walk away either. As the sun began to set, I found myself driving back toward the Desert Mirage Motel, the tape recorder on the seat beside me, a hardware store shopping bag in the back containing a crowbar, a sledgehammer, and a heavy-duty flashlight. I didn't have a plan, exactly. But I had a theory. And a desperate sense that if I didn't confront this now, it would haunt me forever, perhaps literally. The motel looked exactly the same as I approached, the red neon sign buzzing in the twilight. I parked far from room 17, near the office. A different clerk was at the desk, a young woman who barely looked up from her phone as I entered. "Need a room?" she asked, still scrolling. "Actually, I'm looking for Doug," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. The night clerk. "Is he around?" She glanced up. "Doug?" "No, he didn't show up for his shift last night. Boss is pissed." Had to pull a double myself. My stomach clenched. That's not like him, is it? Dunno. Don't know him that well. She shrugged. You want a room or not? Is 17 available? Her fingers tapped at the computer. Yeah, it's open. No one's booked it. She looked at me curiously. You want that specific room? I nodded, sliding my credit card across the counter, trying to ignore the tremor in my hand. Whatever, she said, running the card. It's at the end. Last one on the right. Just like before. As if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And as I took the key and walked back into the Texas night, I knew that whatever waited in room 17, only one of us would be leaving when morning came. Room 17 was immaculate. That was my first shock as I pushed open the door, weapon-laden bag clutched in my trembling hand. The wallpaper showed no signs of the violent tears from the previous night. The carpet was freshly vacuumed. The bed was made with hospital corners, the floral comforter smooth and unwrinkled. No blood. No signs of struggle. No evidence that Doug had ever been there. I set my bag down carefully and surveyed the room. Everything was exactly as it had been when I first checked in, down to the rust-colored stain around the bathroom sink drain. It was as if the room had reset itself, erasing all evidence of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. But I knew better. I had the tape. I had the bloodstains on my discarded clothes. I had the memory of those paper-thin hands reaching for me from inside the walls. I know you're there, I said aloud, my voice steadier than I expected. I know what happened to Doug. And the workers from Borderlands Construction. Silence answered me. Not even the usual creaks and settling noises of an old building. Victor Mercer, I continued. That was the contractor's name, wasn't it? What did he do to you? What did he promise you? Still nothing. The air conditioner hummed to life, startling me despite myself. I opened my bag and removed the crowbar, weighing it in my hand. I'm going to find out what's between these walls. One way or another. That got a response. A faint scratching sound from somewhere near the ceiling. I looked up, half expecting to see a tear forming, but the wallpaper remained intact. You want out, I said. I heard you on the tape. You said Mercer promised you freedom. What if I could help with that? The scratching intensified, moving down the wall nearest the bathroom. I followed the sound, crowbar raised defensively. But you can't hurt anyone else, I added. What you did to Doug, that can't happen again. The scratching stopped abruptly. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a small tear appeared in the wallpaper, right at eye level. Not violent or jagged like before, but deliberate, like a surgical incision. From within the tear, a single eye became visible. Not the empty black socket I'd glimpsed before, but a human eye, bloodshot, yellowed with age, but unmistakably human. It blinked once, regarding me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. You came back. The voice was dry, barely above a whisper, but it didn't sound like multiple voices anymore. Just one. Male. Accented. I swallowed hard, crowbar still raised. I want to understand. The eye continued to study me. Understanding is dangerous. So is ignorance, I countered. People are dying here. People died here long before you arrived. The tear widened slightly, revealing more of the face around the eye, paper-thin skin stretched tight over bone, a cheekbone too sharp, too angular to be natural. Some of us were buried. Some of us were sealed away. All of us were betrayed. I took a step closer, fighting against every instinct screaming at me to run. By Mercer? He built his fortune on our backs, on our bones. The eye narrowed. When we demanded payment, he gave us walls instead of wages, gave us darkness instead of daylight. You were the missing workers, I said, pieces falling into place. The ones who disappeared from the construction site. Some of us. The tear widened further, revealing a mouth, lips cracked and gray. Others came before. Others after. The walls of this place are hungry. They've been hungry for decades. What does that mean? The walls can't be hungry. They're just walls. The eye and mouth disappeared suddenly, the tear sealing itself as if it had never been there. I spun around, sensing movement behind me. Near the bed, another tear was forming, larger this time. Through it, I could see not drywall or insulation, but a narrow corridor stretching impossibly far in both directions. The walls of this corridor were covered in handprints, hundreds of them overlapping, pressed into the surface as if by desperate hands. This motel was built on bad ground, came the voice, now emanating from this new opening. Ground that takes. Ground that keeps. I approached cautiously, crowbar ready. I don't understand. Before the motel, there was another building. Before that, a camp. Before that, a battlefield. Always places of suffering. Always places where people disappeared. The tear widened enough that I could see more clearly into the corridor. It shouldn't have been possible. The space between motel walls couldn't be more than a few inches wide. Yet somehow the corridor stretched out, defying physics, defying reason. And moving along that corridor were figures, human in shape but not in substance. They appeared to be made of the same material as the walls themselves, their bodies thin as paper, jointed in too many places. They moved with a horrible fluidity, like ink spreading through water. Mercer knew, the voice continued, now seeming to come from multiple directions. The contractor before him knew. The owner knows. They feed the walls. They take payment in blood and bone and breath. Why? I whispered, unable to look away from the nightmarish procession in the impossible corridor. Power. Money. The walls give what they take, in different form. The owner never has vacancies. His bills are always paid. His competitors always fail. The ground provides, if you feed it properly. I thought of the motel's persistence in a dying industry, its continued operation despite its obvious decay. How many people had disappeared here over the years, dismissed as transients who simply moved on. And Doug? What did you do to him? A sound like dry laughter emanated from the walls. He became part of us. Part of the walls. As all do, eventually. As if in response to these words, one of the paper-thin figures in the corridor turned toward me. Its face was still forming, features shifting and settling. But I recognized the eyes. Doug's eyes, wide with terror and recognition. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the crowbar. No. This isn't possible. Possibility is thin here. Like the barrier between worlds. The tear began to widen even further, the edges of the wallpaper curling inward. You could join us. See what we see. Know what we know. Paper-thin hands reached through the opening, grasping at the air. Or you could help us. Free us. break down the walls that bind us to this place. I raised the crowbar, my mind racing. If I destroyed the walls, what would I be releasing? Were these truly victims, or had they become something else, something that fed on others as they claimed the motel fed on them? How do I know you won't hurt more people if I let you out? I demanded. You don't, came the simple reply. Faith is required, as it was required of us when we came here seeking better lives. The Doug thing in the corridor pressed closer to the opening, its mouth moving in shapes that didn't match the words I was hearing. Help us, it said in a voice that was both Doug's and not Doug's. End this cycle. My hand tightened on the crowbar. I could destroy this place, tear down the walls, expose whatever lay between them. But I could also leave, alert authorities, try to shut down the motel through legal channels. Neither option guaranteed an end to the suffering. Neither promised safety for future travelers who might stop at this roadside purgatory. What happens if I break the walls? I asked, already knowing I would do it, already certain I had been meant to do it from the moment I first heard those whispers. We go free, said the voice. All of us. For better or worse. And the motel? Will fall. As it should have long ago. I took a deep breath, made my decision, and swung the crowbar with all my strength at the wall beside the tear. The drywall crumbled easily, revealing the space beyond, a space that shifted and changed even as I watched, sometimes a narrow gap filled with electrical wiring and insulation, sometimes that impossible corridor stretching into darkness. I struck again. And again. The walls began to groan, not with pain but with release. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe, hard to see. The tear widened with each impact, the impossible corridor becoming more visible, more real. The paper-thin figures began to stream through the opening, dozens of them, then hundreds. Some brushed against me as they passed, their touch cold as winter air. I caught glimpses of faces, men, women, children, all with that same paper-thin quality, all with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much suffering. Among them was Doug, or what had been Doug. He paused before me, his form already changing, becoming less solid, less defined. Thank you, he whispered, his voice like leaves rustling. Then he was gone, flowing past me toward the door, toward freedom. The walls continued to crumble as I struck them, revealing more of the impossible spaces between. The motel itself seemed to be folding in on itself, reality bending in ways my mind couldn't process. The floor beneath me tilted, then seemed to drop away entirely. I was falling, or the world was falling around me. The boundaries between wall and air, solid and void, disappeared. For a moment that stretched into eternity, I existed in that in-between space, that liminal zone where the rules of physics surrendered to older, stranger laws. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the ground in the parking lot. Dawn was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Where the Desert Mirage Motel had stood was nothing but an empty foundation, cracked concrete slowly being reclaimed by the Texas scrubland. No walls. No rooms. No whispers. I staggered to my feet. My car sat where I'd left it, undisturbed. The crowbar lay beside me, its edge dented and worn as if it had been used to tear down not just walls but the barriers between worlds. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what had happened, a pickup truck slowed on the highway, then pulled into what had been the motel's lot. An older man in a cowboy hat rolled down his window, peering at me curiously. "You all right there, son?" he called. "Looks like you had a rough night." I nodded, unable to find words. He looked past me at the empty foundation. Shame about this place. Been abandoned for years. Keep meaning to tear it down proper, but never get around to it. My blood ran cold. Abandoned? But I stayed here. Just last night. The man frowned. Don't think so. This place burned down back in the 90s. Some kind of electrical fire. Killed the owner and a bunch of guests. He shook his head. They say it was suspicious, but nothing ever came of the investigation. I stared at him, then back at the empty foundation. There were no signs of fire damage, no charred remains. Just emptiness where a building should have been. You need a ride somewhere, the man offered, looking increasingly concerned. Nearest town's about 20 miles. No, I managed. I have my car. I'm fine. He didn't look convinced, but nodded anyway. Well, take care. Shouldn't be sleeping out here in the open. All kinds of things roam these parts at night. As he drove away, I turned slowly in a circle, taking in the empty landscape. No sign of Doug. No sign of the paper-thin people who had streamed out of the walls. No sign that any of it had been real. Except for the tape recorder, still sitting on the passenger seat of my car. I approached cautiously, as if it might bite, and pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then, faintly, voices. Hundreds of them, thousands, speaking in unison. Thank you for freeing us. A pause, then. We are everywhere now. In every wall. In every space between. Listening. Waiting. Remember us when you hear whispers in the walls. The tape ended with a click. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun rise over the Texas desert, wondering what exactly I had released into the world, victims seeking justice, or something older and hungrier that had merely worn their faces. That night, in a different motel many miles away, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the building settling around me. And from within the wall beside my bed came the faintest sound of scratching. Like fingernails. Or something paper-thin. Seeking a way out. Have you ever noticed how some roads seem to go on forever? That's what the old man at the gas station asked me when I stopped for directions. I should have paid more attention to the odd glint in his eyes, the way his withered hand trembled slightly as he traced a route on my map. But I was tired, and the Arizona heat was making me irritable after 8 hours of driving. My name is Daniel Reeves, a wildlife photographer on assignment to capture images of the desert at sunset. I've been on the road for 3 days, making my way from Los Angeles to a remote section of Arizona known for its pristine landscapes. The magazine deadline was tight, and I needed these shots to secure my next contract. I pulled my dusty Jeep back onto Highway 17, following the old man's directions. The landscape was beautiful in that desolate way only deserts can be, endless stretches of ochre sand punctuated by twisted Joshua trees and the occasional rocky outcropping. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, and I found myself frequently adjusting my sunglasses against the glare. Take the unmarked turn off about 20 miles down, he'd said. It's an old service road, but it'll cut 3 hours off your journey. The unmarked turnoff turned out to be little more than a gap in the guardrail and a dirt path that looked barely wide enough for my Jeep. I hesitated, checking my GPS. No signal. My paper map showed nothing here either. Just great. I pulled over and stepped out of the vehicle, the heat hitting me like a physical wall. Something felt off about this place. The silence was absolute, no birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the cacti. Just the ticking of my engine cooling down and my own breathing. As I stood there deliberating, I noticed something strange. A faint buzzing sound just at the edge of hearing. I turned, trying to locate the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the heat. Back in my Jeep, I decided to trust the old man's directions. What was the worst that could happen? I'd backtrack if the road led nowhere. The unpaved path gradually widened into a proper road, surprisingly well maintained for something unmarked on any map. The pavement was fresh, with crisp yellow lines down the center. Strange. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson. Perfect lighting for my photographs. I stopped briefly to capture a few shots, but something about them felt wrong when I reviewed them on my camera's display. The shadows seemed too deep, too angular, as if the laws of perspective had subtly shifted. I drove on, the road curving gently through the landscape. The Joshua trees began to take on odd silhouettes in the fading light, their twisted arms reaching toward the sky like supplicants. Or like people frozen in terror. Get a grip, Daniel. They're just trees. I switched on the radio for company, but all I got was static. Except, wait. Within the white noise, I could almost make out voices, whispering too low to understand. I quickly turned it off. The road continued to curve, always to the right, a gradual arc that should have eventually brought me back toward the main highway. But after 30 minutes of driving, there was no sign of Highway 17, just more desert, more Joshua trees, more crimson sky. The sun seemed frozen on the horizon, neither rising nor setting, casting the world in an eternal twilight. I checked my watch. 7:30. I'd been driving this road for almost an hour. According to the old man, I should have reached my destination by now. Something caught my eye, a mile marker at the side of the road. Except the number was scratched out, replaced with what looked like a crude infinity symbol. My stomach tightened. It's just vandalism. Some bored teenager with too much time on their hands. I pressed the accelerator, eager to reach the end of this strange road. The landscape continued to roll past, unchanging yet somehow different in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The Joshua trees seemed to be in the same positions I'd seen them before. That distinctive rock formation, hadn't I passed it already? The buzzing sound returned, louder now, vibrating in my molars. My headlights caught something in the road ahead, a figure, standing motionless. I slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding on the pavement. There was nothing there. My heart pounded against my ribs as I sat gripping the steering wheel, high beams illuminating an empty stretch of road. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cooling evening air. Pull yourself together, I muttered aloud, my voice sounding strange in the confines of the vehicle. I drove on, more slowly now, scanning the darkening landscape. The crimson sky had deepened to purple, then indigo, yet the horizon still glowed with the last light of a sun that should have set long ago. I checked my phone again. No signal, and the clock read 7:30. Still 7:30. I tapped the screen, thinking it had frozen, but the seconds were ticking by. Just not the minutes. Not the hours. That's when I saw the gas station ahead, the same gas station where I'd stopped for directions. The same withered sign, the same flickering lights, the same old man standing outside, watching the road. Watching me. I drove past, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't possible. I'd been driving away from the gas station for over an hour. The road curved again, always to the right, and I realized with growing horror what was happening. I wasn't driving toward my destination. I was driving in a circle. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road, my hand shaking as I cut the engine. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. My watch still read 7:30, the second hand ticking normally while the minute hand remained frozen. "This isn't happening," I whispered to the empty car. "This isn't real." I closed my eyes and took several deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. When I opened them again, nothing had changed. The indigo sky, the frozen time, the road stretching before me in an impossible loop. I reached for my camera, needing to document this, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. The viewfinder showed the road ahead, but when I took the picture and checked the display, there was nothing but static, digital noise where the image should be. A chill ran through me despite the lingering heat. I tried again, focusing on a nearby Joshua tree. Another corrupted image. A third attempt captured only darkness with a faint, blurred figure in the distance, a figure I couldn't see with my naked eye. I dropped the camera like it had burned me. The buzzing sound had returned, louder now, with a rhythmic quality almost like words. I strained to understand it, tilting my head toward the open window. "Keeps driving, never stops, keeps driving." I slammed the window shut, my breath coming in gasps. Just my imagination. Had to be. I checked my supplies. Half a tank of gas. 2 bottles of water. Some protein bars. My camping gear in the back. Enough to last a while, but not indefinitely. I needed to find a way out of this, whatever this was. Maybe if I drove the other direction? I performed a careful 3-point turn and headed back the way I'd come, accelerating past the spot where I pulled over. The road stretched ahead, curving gently to the left now instead of right. After 15 minutes of driving, I spotted familiar headlights in the distance. My heart sank as I pulled up beside my own tire tracks in the sand right where I'd stopped before. Somehow, I'd made another complete circle. "Think, Daniel, think," I muttered to myself. The old man at the gas station, he must know something. If I could find the gas station again. I started driving, this time paying closer attention to my surroundings. The Joshua trees seemed to be watching me now, their twisted forms silhouetted against the darkening sky like sentinels. In the distance, mountains rose sharp against the horizon, but they never seemed to get any closer no matter how long I drove. After what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, with my watch still frozen at 7:30, I spotted the flickering lights of the gas station. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by apprehension. What if the old man wasn't there? What if this was just another trick of this impossible road? I pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch under my tires unnaturally loud in the stillness. The neon open sign buzzed erratically, casting alternating red and blue shadows across the weathered building. The old man stood exactly where I'd last seen him, as if he hadn't moved since I'd left. As I approached him, I noticed something disturbing. His shadow on the ground didn't match his silhouette. It seemed to writhe and stretch, reaching toward me with elongated fingers. "You're back," he said, his voice desert dry. Not a question. A statement. "What's happening to me?" I demanded, stopping a few feet away from him. "What is this place?" The old man's smile revealed teeth too perfect, too white for his weathered face. "You took the wrong turn." "That's not an answer." My voice rose, edged with panic. "How do I get out of here?" "Out?" He tilted his head, the movement slightly too fluid, as if his neck contained too many vertebrae. Why would you want to leave? The road has chosen you. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Chosen me for what? Instead of answering, he pointed toward the horizon. Keep driving. You'll understand eventually. I grabbed his arm, desperate now. Please. I need to get back to the highway. To the real world. His skin felt wrong under my fingers, cold and somehow insubstantial, like gripping smoke given temporary form. He looked down at my hand, then back at my face, his eyes reflecting the neon lights in a way human eyes shouldn't. The highway is still there, he said softly. It's always been there. You just can't reach it anymore. He gently removed my hand, and I let him, suddenly afraid to maintain contact with whatever he was. How many? I whispered. How many others like me are trapped here? His expression shifted, something like sorrow passing across his features. Fewer than there should be. More than there once were. The road is hungry. A gust of wind kicked up dust in the parking lot, and when it settled, the old man was gone. Just gone, between one blink and the next. I spun around, searching the darkness, but the gas station lot was empty. When I turned back to the building, I froze in horror. The gas station was no longer there, just an abandoned concrete foundation, overgrown with desert plants and covered in decades of sand. The neon sign lay shattered on the ground, dark and dead. My legs gave out, and I sank to my knees on the cracked concrete. This couldn't be happening. Places don't just disappear. People don't just vanish. Unless they were never really there to begin with. I crawled back to my Jeep, clinging to the one tangible thing I knew was real. Inside, I locked the doors and turned the key with trembling fingers. The engine roared to life, the sound comforting in its normalcy. As I pulled away from the ruins of the gas station, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. Headlights, far behind me on the road. Another vehicle. My heart leapt with hope. Another person. Someone else trapped here who might know more than I did. I slowed down, watching the headlights draw closer in my mirror. But something was wrong. The headlights were too high off the ground for a normal vehicle. And they weren't white but a sickly yellow, casting long beams through the darkness. The vehicle behind me was massive, its engine producing a low, guttural rumble I could feel through my seat. A truck? An RV? Whatever it was gaining on me. I pressed the accelerator, the needle climbing past 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. The road blurred at the edges of my headlights, the center line flashing by hypnotically. The vehicle behind matched my speed effortlessly, growing larger in my mirror. I still couldn't make out its shape, just those tall, yellow headlights and the massive dark silhouette behind them. Panic clawed at my throat as I pushed the Jeep to its limits, the engine screaming in protest. 90 miles per hour. 95. The road curved sharply ahead, too sharply for this speed. I had seconds to make a decision, try to take the turn and risk rolling the Jeep, or slam on the brakes and face whatever was behind me. I chose the turn, wrenching the steering wheel while easing off the accelerator. The Jeep fishtailed, tires squealing on the pavement. For one heart-stopping moment, I felt the vehicle begin to tip, the world tilting as two wheels left the ground. Then gravity reclaimed me, the Jeep slamming back onto all four tires with a jolt that rattled my teeth. I skidded to a stop on the shoulder, engine stalling in the sudden silence. The headlights behind me had vanished. I sat motionless, listening to my own ragged breathing and the tick of the cooling engine. When I finally gathered the courage to restart the Jeep and continue driving, I realized something had changed. The stars above were different now, constellations I didn't recognize wheeling slowly across the sky. And ahead, the road no longer curved but stretched straight toward the horizon, disappearing into darkness. I was still trapped, but something had shifted. The loop had changed, and whatever was behind me was still out there, waiting. The straight road continued for what felt like hours, the unchanging landscape rushing past my headlights like an endless film reel. My watch remained frozen at 7:30, but the sky above told a different story. The unfamiliar stars had completed a quarter of their journey across the heavens. I was beginning to understand that time itself moved differently here. Or perhaps it didn't move at all. The tension from my encounter with the mysterious vehicle had begun to fade when I spotted something ahead, a faint glow on the horizon that resolved into the lights of what appeared to be a diner. A real building, not a mirage or ruin like the gas station had become. As I drew closer, I could make out a vintage roadside establishment, chrome-sided with large windows and a flickering neon sign that read "Last Stop Diner." Several vehicles were parked outside, an old Mustang, a pickup truck, and a motorcycle. I pulled into the lot, hope and suspicion warring within me. Was this another trick of the road, or had I found other people trapped in this nightmare? The diner looked ordinary enough, with warm lights spilling from the windows and the silhouettes of people moving inside. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. If this was another illusion, I wasn't sure I could handle the disappointment. The bell above the door jangled as I entered, and several faces turned toward me. Normal human faces, tired and worried but unmistakably real. There were 5 people inside, a middle-aged waitress behind the counter, a trucker type in a booth by himself, a young couple sharing a milkshake, and an elderly woman reading a book near the window. They all stared at me with the same expression, recognition not of me personally, but of what I represented. Another lost traveler. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, already reaching for a mug. Her name tag read Maggie. I nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "How long have you been here?" I asked without preamble. Maggie's smile was sad as she poured the coffee. "Depends on how you count time in a place where watches don't work. For me, it's been a while." "You're trapped too." "We all are." She gestured around the diner. "Everyone here took a wrong turn somewhere." The elderly woman looked up from her book. 3 years, by my count. Though the seasons don't change here, so it's hard to be sure. 18 months, said the young man with his arm around his girlfriend. We were on our way to Vegas to get married. The girlfriend held up her hand, showing a modest engagement ring. "Still waiting on that ceremony," she said with forced cheerfulness. The trucker just grunted, not offering his own timeline. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, its warmth reassuring. "Is there a way out?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. The couple exchanged glances. The elderly woman returned to her book. Maggie wiped down the counter with methodical strokes. "Some say there is," she finally offered. "Others have tried and never come back. Could mean they escaped. Could mean something worse. Something worse than being trapped forever on an endless road?" I asked. The trucker spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly from disuse. "The road isn't the worst thing out there. It's what shares it with us." My mind flashed to the vehicle that had pursued me, with its 2 high yellow headlights and massive silhouette. I think I saw it. Or one of them. It chased me. All movement in the diner ceased. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause momentarily. "You outran it?" the trucker asked, disbelief evident in his tone. "I took a curve too fast. Nearly rolled my Jeep. When I recovered, it was gone." The elderly woman closed her book. "That's why the road changed for you. You survived an encounter. That's rare." "What is it?" I asked. "What's out there?" Maggie shook her head. "We don't know exactly. We call them the road keepers. They patrol the highway, keeping us in our loops. They don't always look the same," added the young woman. "Sometimes they appear as vehicles. Sometimes as hitchhikers." "Javier," her voice broke, and she stopped. "Javier was with us," her fiancé explained. "He picked up someone he thought needed help. We never saw him again." I sipped my coffee, which tasted perfectly normal despite the surreal conversation. "So we're all stuck in loops, but the loops can change? And these road keepers, they make sure we stay trapped?" The trucker nodded. "That's the working theory. But here's the thing, sometimes the loops connect. Like now. Like this diner. It exists at the intersection of several loops." Hope flickered within me. So if the loops connect, there must be a way to find the connection that leads back to the real world. "If there is, none of us have found it," Maggie said. "Though not for lack of trying." The elderly woman leaned forward. "There are patterns. The road doesn't just change randomly. It responds to us somehow. To our fears, our choices." "Like a test," I murmured. "Or a trap," the trucker countered. The bell above the door jangled again, and we all turned to look. A new arrival, a middle-aged man in hiking gear, looking as disoriented as I had felt. "Well, look at that," Maggie said softly. "Another one joins the circuit." She moved to greet him as I turned back to my coffee, noticing something I'd missed before. A map was spread out on the counter, weighted down with salt and pepper shakers. But it wasn't a normal road map. It showed overlapping circles of various sizes, like a complex Venn diagram, with small notations in different handwritings. "What's this?" I asked. The trucker moved to sit beside me. "Our collective attempt to map this place. Each circle is someone's loop. Where they overlap, places like this diner can exist, shared spaces where those of us on different loops can meet." I studied the intricate diagram. "And have you identified any exit points? Places where a loop might connect back to the real world?" He pointed to several question marks drawn at various points. "Theoretical possibilities. But here's the problem, the map keeps changing as the loops shift. What was an intersection yesterday might be gone tomorrow." "Still," I said, tracing one of the circles with my finger, "it's something to work with." The young couple had joined us now, looking over my shoulder at the map. "We've been trying to coordinate," the woman said. "If enough of us try different routes at the same time, one of us might find a way out." "And then what?" I asked. "How would you tell the others?" Her face fell. "We haven't figured that part out yet." The new arrival was speaking with Maggie at the far end of the counter, his voice rising in the familiar cadence of panic and disbelief. I remembered my own reaction all too clearly. The lights in the diner flickered suddenly, and a hush fell over the group. "They know we're gathering," the elderly woman said, closing her book and standing. "It's time to move." "What's happening?" I asked, rising from my stool. The trucker was already heading for the door. When too many of us come together in one place, they notice. And they don't like it. Outside, the night had grown darker, the stars blotted out by clouds that hadn't been there before. A wind had picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of that buzzing I'd heard earlier on the road. Where should I go? I asked, keys in hand as we stood in the parking lot. The elderly woman pressed something into my palm, a small, hand-drawn copy of part of the map. Head east from here. Follow the road until you see 3 identical rock formations in a row. Turn north there, off the pavement. There's another intersection point, a motel where more of us gather. Ask for Thomas. But which way is east? I asked, looking up at the starless sky. She pointed, her finger trembling slightly. That way. For now, at least. Directions have a way of shifting here too. The young couple was already in their Mustang, engine running. We'll see you at the motel, the man called. If we both make it. The buzzing grew louder, resolving into that almost language I'd heard before. Gathering, breaking rules, separate them. Go now, the elderly woman urged, already moving toward her own vehicle. And remember, if you see headlights behind you, don't slow down. Don't stop for hitchhikers. And whatever you do, don't drive in reverse. Why not? I asked, but she was already gone, sliding into her car. The diner's lights flickered again, more violently this time, and through the windows I could see Maggie and the new arrival rushing toward the door. I jumped into my Jeep and started the engine, tires spinning on gravel as I accelerated out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw the diner's lights go out completely, plunging the building into darkness. And then, impossibly, the diner itself seemed to fold inward, collapsing like a house of cards until nothing remained but an empty patch of desert. I drove east, or what I hoped was east, the copied map clutched in one hand, searching the darkness for 3 identical rock formations and trying not to think about what had just happened to the diner and the people still inside it. The roadkeepers were hunting now. And somehow, I'd become part of a resistance I hadn't known existed until an hour ago. My watch still read 7:30, but I knew time was running out. The road stretched before me, a ribbon of black cutting through the desert night. I drove with one hand on the wheel, the other clutching the hand-drawn map, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. No headlights appeared behind me, but that offered little comfort. The roadkeepers could be anywhere, watching, waiting. After what felt like hours, I spotted them, 3 rock formations rising from the desert floor, identical in shape and size, lined up with unnatural precision. They resembled giants' fingers pointing accusingly at the sky, their silhouettes dark against the starless night. I slowed, searching for the turn-off the elderly woman had mentioned. There, a dirt track heading north, barely visible in my headlights. I made the turn, the Jeep bouncing over ruts and rocks, dust billowing behind me. The track went through scrubland, Joshua trees watching like silent spectators. The terrain grew rougher, forcing me to slow to a crawl, the suspension groaning in protest. Just when I began to think I'd made a mistake, lights appeared in the distance, warm, yellow squares against the darkness. The Desert Mirage Motel materialized out of the night, a single-story structure of weathered adobe with a flickering neon sign. Unlike the diner, which had seemed normal at first glance, this place wore its strangeness openly. The building appeared to ripple slightly at the edges, like heat waves rising from asphalt. The neon sign occasionally displayed letters from alphabets I didn't recognize. Several vehicles were parked in the lot, the Mustang belonging to the young couple from the diner among them. Relief washed over me. At least they had made it here safely. I parked and approached the office, a bell chiming discordantly as I pushed open the door. Behind the desk sat a man with a shock of white hair and skin so deeply tanned it resembled leather. He didn't look up from the book he was reading. "Room 17, he said, sliding a key across the counter. "They're waiting for you." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the key. "I was told to ask for Thomas." Now he looked up, his eyes pale blue and unerringly clear. "I'm not Thomas. Thomas doesn't work nights." He returned to his book. "Room 17. End of the hall." I took the key, its weight oddly reassuring in my palm, and made my way down the corridor. The motel seemed larger on the inside than it had appeared from the outside, the hallway stretching longer than should have been possible. At room 17, I knocked softly. The door opened immediately, revealing the young woman from the diner. "You made it," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Come in, quickly." The room inside was standard motel fare, 2 beds with faded coverlets, a small table with chairs, a television that displayed only static. But it was the people that caught my attention. About a dozen individuals were crowded into the space, some sitting on the beds, others standing against the walls. I recognized the young couple and the elderly woman from the diner, but the rest were strangers. A tall, thin man with a professor's bearings stood at the center of the room before a map similar to the one I'd seen at the diner, but much larger and more detailed, pinned to the wall. "This is Daniel," the young woman announced. He outran a roadkeeper. All conversation ceased, and every eye turned to me. The tall man approached, extending his hand. "Miles Hartford, former physicist, current prisoner of the loop, like yourself." I shook his hand, noticing the calluses and burns that spoke of manual labor. The elderly woman at the diner told me to ask for Thomas. A heavy-set man in a trucker's cap nodded from one of the beds. "That's me." "She made it out of the diner, then?" "Yes," I confirmed, "along with most of the others. But the diner itself, it collapsed somehow. Folded in on itself." Murmurs rippled through the group. Miles exchanged glances with Thomas. "That's new," he said quietly. "They're getting more aggressive." "What exactly are they?" I asked. "These roadkeepers?" Miles gestured for me to sit. "That's what we've been trying to figure out for the past. Well, time is difficult to measure here, but let's say a long while. We have theories," Thomas added. "Some think they're aliens. Others say government experiment. I personally believe they're interdimensional beings." "I don't care what they are," said a woman I hadn't noticed before, her voice hard with anger. "I just want to know how to kill them." Miles held up a placating hand. "Maria lost her daughter to the loop. She's understandably focused on vengeance rather than escape." "And you're not?" Maria shot back. "After what they did to Elijah." Miles's expression tightened. "We all have our losses. But right now, escape is our priority." He turned back to the map, gesturing for me to join him. "This is what we know so far. The loop, or loops, more accurately, exist in a kind of pocket dimension that overlaps with our reality at certain points." I studied the intricate diagram, noting how it resembled the smaller version I'd seen at the diner, but with more detail, dozens of overlapping circles, each marked with notations I didn't understand. "Each circle represents someone's personal loop," Miles explained. "They vary in size and configuration, but all share certain characteristics. They're closed systems that periodically intersect with other loops at nodes, places like the diner or this motel. The road responds to emotional states, added Thomas. Fear, hope, anger, they all cause shifts in the loop structure. That's why you were able to change your loop when you outran the roadkeeper, the elderly woman said, stepping forward. Your fear and then your triumph created a branch in your personal loop. Which is significant, Miles continued, because it means the loops can be manipulated. And if they can be manipulated, they can be escaped, I finished. Potentially, Miles cautioned. We've had limited success. Limited? I asked. A heavy silence fell over the room. We've sent 17 people through potential exit points, Thomas finally said. 3 came back, badly injured. The rest, we don't know. But recently, Miles added, his voice brightening, we've made a breakthrough. Maria's daughter, before she disappeared, managed to leave us a message. He moved to the bedside table and opened the drawer, removing a small digital recorder. This appeared in Thomas's truck 3 days ago. The timestamp says it was recorded 6 months from now. He pressed play, and a young woman's voice, breathless and hurried, filled the room. If anyone finds this, the exit point is real, but it moves. It follows a pattern based on lunar cycles in the real world. The roadkeepers guard it, but they can't seal it completely. You need to, Static interrupted her words, then, at the coordinates we calculated. But be careful. The closer you get to the exit, the more reality breaks down. Things appear that are really more static. And remember, they can look like us now. Trust no one who, the recording cut off abruptly. Miles clicked off the recorder. That's all we have. But it confirms our theories about the exit point and its movement. And you've calculated where it will be next? I asked. Thomas nodded. Tonight. About 20 miles from here, at a place where 3 loops intersect. If the pattern holds, a temporary gate back to our reality should open just before dawn. Which is why we need to move quickly, Miles added. We have a plan to get a small group there, using multiple vehicles as decoys. The road keepers will be guarding it, Maria warned. They always know when we're making a coordinated effort. Which is why we need everyone's help, Miles said, looking directly at me. Even newcomers like yourself. I felt a surge of hope mixed with suspicion. Why would you include me? You don't know anything about me. We know you outran a roadkeeper, Thomas said. That's rare. Most who encounter them directly don't survive. And we need all the help we can get, added the young woman from the diner. I'm Lena, by the way. This is my fiancé, Mark. Mark nodded in greeting. We're all strangers here, thrown together by circumstances. Trust is a luxury none of us can afford, but cooperation is our only chance. I considered their words, weighing my options. Stay alone in my loop, driving endlessly until I ran out of gas or sanity, or join this desperate attempt at escape with people I barely knew. What's the plan? I finally asked. Relief visibly swept through the group. Miles pointed to the map. We split into 4 groups, each taking a different route to the intersection point. 3 will be decoys to draw away the road keepers. The 4th will carry something we believe might help force the gate open wider and longer. What's that? Miles hesitated. Something Maria's daughter mentioned in an earlier message. An artifact from the real world that doesn't belong here, something that resists the loop's reality. Like what? Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a child's toy, a simple spinning top made of bright red plastic. "This belonged to my son," he said quietly. "It behaves differently here. Observe." He set the top spinning on the tabletop. Instead of gradually slowing and toppling, it spun faster and faster, rising slightly above the surface until it hovered an inch in the air, still spinning. The air around it seemed to warp and bend. Objects with strong emotional connections to the real world retain some of their reality, Miles explained. They reject the physics of this place. We believe such objects might help force open the gate. "Do I have anything like that?" I asked, thinking of my possessions. "Your camera," Lena suggested. "You mentioned it showed things you couldn't see with your naked eye. That's a sign it's rejecting this reality." I nodded slowly, remembering the blurred figure that had appeared in one of my photographs. "It's in my Jeep." "Get it," Miles said. "We leave in 20 minutes. Each vehicle will take a different route. Daniel, you'll come with me and Maria in the lead car. Your Jeep is too recognizable now. The road keepers will be looking for it." As I stepped outside to retrieve my camera, the desert night enveloped me. The air felt wrong somehow, too dense, as if it had substance beyond mere atmosphere. The stars had reappeared, but they formed constellations I'd never seen before, wheeling across the sky at an accelerated pace. Time was behaving strangely again. My watch still read 7:30, but the quality of the darkness suggested late night, perhaps 3 or 4 in the morning. I reached my Jeep and grabbed my camera from the passenger seat. As I turned to head back to the motel, something caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, half hidden in shadow. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding flat in the heavy air. The figure didn't respond, but took a step forward into the dim light cast by the motel sign. It was the old man from the gas station, his withered face expressionless. "You," I said, backing away. "What do you want?" "To warn you," he replied, his voice carrying easily despite the distance between us. "The path you're choosing leads to destruction. Why should I believe you? You're the one who sent me down this cursed road in the first place." He smiled sadly. "I merely pointed out a turn that was already waiting for you." As for belief, he shrugged. "Believe what you will. But ask yourself this, why would people who have been trapped here for so long suddenly include a newcomer in their desperate escape plan?" A chill ran through me. They need all the help they can get. Or they need sacrifices to distract the road keepers. His eyes reflected the neon light unnaturally. Not everyone in that room is what they appear to be. Before I could respond, the motel door opened and Thomas stepped out. "Daniel? Everything okay?" When I looked back, the old man was gone. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just getting my camera." Thomas's eyes skimmed the darkness. "Did you see something out here?" I hesitated, the old man's warning echoing in my mind. Could I trust these people? Could I trust anyone in this place? "No," I finally said. "Nothing important." Back in Room 17, preparations were underway. The group had divided into 4 teams, weapons distributed among them, mostly improvised things like tire irons and flare guns, but a few had actual firearms. "Where did you get guns?" I asked Miles as he checked the magazine of a pistol. "Some of us came into the loop armed," he explained. "Others found them along the way." "Do they work against the road keepers?" His expression was grim. "Sometimes they slow them down. Nothing seems to stop them permanently. Maria approached, a shotgun cradled in her arms. We need to move. Dawn's approaching. Outside, the group split up, heading to their assigned vehicles. I climbed into the back seat of an old Cadillac, with Miles driving and Maria riding shotgun, literally, her weapon ready across her lap. As our convoy pulled away from the motel, I glanced back to see the building shimmer and fade, like a mirage dissolving in the morning light. But it wasn't morning yet. The sky remained dark, though a faint glow had appeared on the eastern horizon. The motel, I said. It's gone. The intersection points aren't stable, Miles explained, his eyes on the road. They exist only when they're needed, then fold back into the fabric of the loop. Like the diner, I murmured. Exactly. Though the diner's collapse was more violent. The road keepers are changing the rules. We drove in silence for a while, the Cadillac's headlights cutting through the darkness. The road before us was straight now, unnaturally so, as if drawn with a ruler across the desert. In the distance, I could see the headlights of the other 3 vehicles spreading out as they took different routes. Decoys, Maria said, noticing my gaze. Each team has a different colored flare. If they spot road keepers, they'll signal, hopefully drawing them away from us. And if they catch one of the decoy teams? I asked. Neither Miles nor Maria answered, their silence more eloquent than words. The eastern horizon continued to brighten, not with the golden glow of sunrise, but with a strange, silvery luminescence that seemed to pulse rhythmically. The road began to change as we drove, the asphalt cracking and shifting beneath our tires. Vegetation appeared alongside, not desert plants but impossibly tall trees with translucent leaves that chimed like glass when the wind touched them. Reality's breaking down, Miles said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. We're getting close to the intersection point. The buzzing sound returned, louder than before, resolving into distinct words that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Boundary breach, convergence imminent, deploy sentinels. They know, Maria said, chambering around in her shotgun. Get ready. The road ahead split suddenly, diverging into 3 separate paths. Miles took the middle route without hesitation, the Cadillac lurching as the pavement buckled beneath us. In the distance, a red flare arced into the sky, followed by the faint pop of gunfire. Team 1's engaged, Miles said grimly. Let's hope they can hold them off long enough. The silvery light ahead grew brighter, pulsing faster. The landscape around us had transformed completely now. We were driving through a forest of crystalline trees, their branches reaching toward a sky filled with impossible geometries. The air itself seemed to thicken and thin in waves, making breathing difficult. There, Maria pointed ahead. The convergence point. A structure had appeared in the middle of the road, a towering archway made of what looked like flowing liquid metal, its surface rippling and shifting. Through it, I could see glimpses of a normal desert highway, cars passing, the real world continuing its mundane existence just beyond our reach. The gate, Miles breathed. It's open. A green flare shot into the sky to our right, followed immediately by a blue one to our left. All teams engaged, Maria said. It's now or never. Miles floored the accelerator, the Cadillac hurtling toward the shimmering archway. But as we approached, a massive shape moved to block our path, a vehicle unlike any I'd ever seen, part truck, part living organism, its surface covered in undulating patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. Its headlights blazed that sickly yellow I remembered all too well. Roadkeeper! I shouted. Miles swerved, the Cadillac fishtailing on the unstable surface. Maria leaned out the window, firing her shotgun at the monstrous vehicle. The buckshot seemed to pass through it without effect, like shooting at smoke. The artifacts. Miles shouted. Use the artifacts. I fumbled with my camera, not sure what to do with it. Maria pulled Thomas's spinning top from her pocket and hurled it at the roadkeeper. The small toy struck the creature's surface and sank into it like a stone into water. A terrible screech filled the air, and the roadkeeper's form rippled violently. Now! Miles yelled, spinning the wheel and aiming the Cadillac directly at the gap that had opened in the roadkeeper's form. I raised my camera instinctively and pressed the shutter button. A flash of light erupted, brighter than seemed possible from a simple camera. The roadkeeper's shape contracted, as if in pain. We shot through the gap, the Cadillac's engine screaming in protest as Miles pushed it to its limits. The archway loomed before us, the real world visible through its shimmering surface. Hold on! Miles shouted as we hit the boundary at full speed. Reality itself seemed to stretch and tear around us. I felt a sensation like being pulled in every direction at once, my very atoms threatening to separate. Through the windshield, I could see the highway beyond, solid and real, just a few yards away. Then something hit us from behind, a tremendous force that sent the Cadillac spinning. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. I was thrown against the door, pain exploding through my shoulder. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the archway collapsing, folding in on itself like the diner had done, taking with it our last chance of escape. I awoke to the sound of dripping water. My body ached, my head throbbed, and something warm and wet was trickling down my face. Blood, probably. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the dim light. I was lying on my back, still inside the Cadillac, but the vehicle was on its side. The windows were shattered, the metal frame twisted beyond recognition. Through the broken windshield, I could see a rocky ceiling above. We appeared to be in some kind of cave. Miles? I croaked. Maria? No response. I shifted carefully, glass crunching beneath me as I tried to orient myself. The driver's seat was empty, the door torn off its hinges. Maria was gone too, the shotgun she'd been holding now lying on what had become the floor of the vehicle. I extracted myself painfully from the wreckage, every movement sending fresh waves of agony through my battered body. Outside the car, the cave stretched in both directions, its walls glittering with embedded crystals that provided the dim illumination. Hello? I called, my voice echoing strangely. Anyone there? Again, no response. I was alone. I checked myself for serious injuries, a deep cut on my forehead, various scrapes and bruises, and a shoulder that screamed in protest while I moved it, but nothing life-threatening. My camera hung around my neck, somehow intact despite the crash. I had no idea where I was or what had happened after we hit the boundary. Had we made it through to the real world? If so, this cave didn't seem like any part of Arizona I recognized. If not, where in the loop had we ended up? With no better option, I began walking down the tunnel, using the glow from the crystals to guide my way. The cave system seemed to extend indefinitely, branching occasionally but always leading deeper underground. The air grew colder the further I went, carrying a faint metallic taste that coated my tongue. After what felt like hours of wandering, I heard something, a distant sound that might have been voices. I followed it, moving as quickly as my injuries would allow, until I emerged into a vast cavern. What I saw there stopped me in my tracks. The cavern was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows far above. But it wasn't the size that left me speechless, it was what filled it. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of vehicles were arranged in concentric circles, forming a massive spiral pattern across the stone floor. Cars, trucks, motorcycles, even a few buses and RVs, all from different eras, some so ancient they were little more than rusted frames. And moving among them were people, dozens of them, walking with the slow, shuffling gait of sleepwalkers. Their eyes were vacant, their expressions blank as they circled the vehicles endlessly, like automated figures in some bizarre clockwork display. Beautiful, isn't it? I spun around to find the old man from the gas station standing behind me, his weathered face serene in the crystal light. "What is this place?" I demanded, backing away from him. "The collection," he replied simply. "The final resting place for those who never escape the loop." I looked again at the shambling figures. Those people, are they alive? In a manner of speaking. They're trapped between states of being not quite alive, not quite dead. Just preserved. Horror crawled up my spine as I recognized some of the wandering figures. Thomas, the elderly woman from the diner, Mark and Lena, even Miles and Maria, all now reduced to these empty shells. What happened to them? I whispered. They crashed, just like you did. The boundary between worlds is not easily crossed. Most who attempt it end up here, in the deepest part of the loop. And you? What are you in all this? The old man smiled. A caretaker of sorts. My job is to maintain the collection, to ensure that those who enter the loop eventually find their way here. You're one of them, or road keeper. He inclined his head slightly. That's what your friends called us. An adequate term, I suppose, though not entirely accurate. Anger surged through me. Why? Why trap people here? What's the purpose of all this? Purpose? He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Does a spider's web need a purpose beyond its function? The loop exists to capture, to collect. It has always been so. I don't accept that, I said, my hands clenching into fists despite the pain. There has to be a way out. There is, he admitted, surprising me. There always has been. But few find it. The archway, the gate, is a distraction, he interrupted. A false hope we allow to perpetuate. It keeps the collection growing. I stared at him, trying to comprehend the cruelty of the system he described. Then what's the real way out? Instead of answering directly, he gestured to my camera. What do you see through that lens that others cannot? I frowned, confused by the question, but raised the camera to my eye. Through the viewfinder, the cavern transformed. The spiral of vehicles glowed with an eerie blue light, and the shuffling figures were surrounded by swirling auras of color. But there was something else, a bright point of white light at the very center of the spiral. I lowered the camera. There's something at the center. Yes, the old man said. The way out has always been at the center. But to reach it, one must walk against the flow, against the very current of the loop itself. Few have the strength for such a journey. I looked again at the spiral. To reach the center, I would have to push past all those shambling figures, moving contrary to their endless circuit. The task seemed impossible. Why are you telling me this? I asked suspiciously. Why help me escape? The old man's expression shifted, something almost human flickering across his features. Because in all my years as caretaker, I have never seen anyone survive a direct encounter with one of us. You did. Twice. That, interests me. So I'm just a curiosity to you? You're an anomaly, he corrected. And anomalies sometimes reveal truths about systems that were previously hidden. I stared at him, trying to detect any deception, but his weathered face remained impassive. If I reach the center, what then? That, he said, you must discover for yourself. He turned away, moving toward the edge of the cavern. One last thing, he added without looking back. Time works differently at the center. What seems like moments to you will be years in the world you left behind. Consider carefully if that's a price you're willing to pay for freedom. Before I could ask anything more, he vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone with my decision. I stood at the edge of the spiral, watching the slow procession of the captured. They took no notice of me, their eyes fixed on nothing, their paths predetermined. Among them were all those who had helped me, who had tried to escape and failed. Could I simply join them? Give up and become another exhibit in this macabre collection? The thought was tempting in its simplicity. No more fear, no more pain, just endless, mindless walking. But no! I hadn't come this far to surrender. I raised my camera again, fixing the bright point at the center in my viewfinder. Then I stepped into the spiral and began to walk against the flow. The resistance was immediate and overwhelming, not physical but something more fundamental, as if I were trying to walk upstream in a powerful river. Each step required immense effort, my muscles burning with exertion. The shuffling figures brushed past me, their vacant eyes never registering my presence. I pushed forward, focusing on my breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other. The spiral seemed to stretch and contract around me, distances becoming fluid and unreliable. Sometimes the center appeared close enough to touch, other times it receded to an impossible distance. My injuries throbbed in time with my heartbeat, the cut on my forehead reopening, blood trickling into my eye. I wiped it away and pressed on, using the camera as my guide, keeping the bright point centered in the viewfinder. Time lost all meaning as I struggled toward the center. I might have been walking for minutes or days, there was no way to tell. My watch still read 7:30, frozen in the moment I'd first entered the loop. The further I progressed, the more the environment around me began to change. The crystal light dimmed, shadows deepening. The air grew thick, resistant, each breath a labor. Sounds became distorted, the shuffling of feet, the distant drip of water, all stretching and compressing in impossible ways. And then I heard the voices, whispers at first, then louder, a cacophony of pleas and warnings from those I was passing. Turn back, join us, rest now, give up, you'll never make it, stay with us. I gritted my teeth and pushed forward, trying to block out the voices. They weren't real, I told myself. Just another trick of the loop, another attempt to keep me trapped. The resistance increased exponentially as I neared the center, each step requiring more strength than the last. My legs trembled with exhaustion, my lungs burned. But the bright point was closer now, resolving into what appeared to be a small door or hatch in the floor at the very center of the spiral. I was only yards away when they appeared, road keepers materializing from the shadows, their forms shifting and flickering between human shapes and something far more alien. They moved to block my path, their yellow eyes fixed on me with cold intelligence. Enough, one said, wearing the face of the gas station attendant but distorted, elongated. You do not belong at the center. No one escapes the collection, said another, this one taking the form of Maggie from the diner, her features fluid and unstable. I raised my camera instinctively and pressed the shutter button. The flash erupted, blindingly bright in the dimness of the cavern. The road keepers recoiled, their forms rippling in apparent pain. I didn't wait for them to recover but lunged forward, closing the final distance to the center. The hatch was there, a simple circular door set into the stone floor with an ordinary handle. Behind me, I could hear the road keepers recovering, moving toward me with unnatural speed. I grabbed the handle and pulled with the last of my strength. The hatch opened, revealing not a passage but a swirling vortex of light, colors I had no names for spinning in hypnotic patterns. From within came the sound of wind and distant traffic, the real world calling. I looked back once at the vast cavern, at the endless spiral of captured souls, at the road keepers rushing toward me with expressions of alien rage. Then I took a deep breath and jumped into the light. The sensation was indescribable, like being unmade and remade in the same instant, my very atoms torn apart and reassembled. Light and sound and feeling all blurred together in an overwhelming rush. And then, suddenly, impact. Hard ground beneath me. Hot asphalt burning against my cheek. The sound of cars rushing past, horns blaring. The smell of exhaust and dust and the unmistakable scent of the real world. I lay there for a moment, afraid to open my eyes, afraid this was just another trick, another loop within the loop. Finally, I looked up. I was lying on the shoulder of Highway 17 in Arizona. Real cars driven by real people sped past, a few slowing to look at the disheveled man at the roadside. The sun was high in the sky, bright and ordinary and beautiful. With trembling fingers, I checked my watch. It displayed the correct time and date, but not the date I was expecting. According to my watch, 3 years had passed since I'd taken that fateful turn off the highway. 3 years gone in what had felt like days. I staggered to my feet, wincing at the pain from injuries that were simultaneously hours and years old. My camera hung around my neck, the lens cracked but the body intact. I raised it to my eye out of habit, some part of me needing to confirm that the world I saw was real. Through the damaged viewfinder, the highway looked normal, no auras, no strange glows, no anomalies. Just an ordinary road stretching toward the horizon. But as I lowered the camera, I noticed something in the distance, a gap in the guardrail, a dirt path leading away from the highway into the desert. It looked familiar, terrifyingly so. And beside it, barely visible from this distance, stood a figure watching the road, watching me. A passing motorist had pulled over, calling out to ask if I needed help. I turned toward them gratefully, relieved to hear another human voice after so long in the loop. While I looked back at the gap in the guardrail, the figure was gone. But the road remained, waiting patiently for the next traveler to take a wrong turn, to become part of the collection. And somewhere within it, the loop continued its endless cycle, a perfect trap for the unwary. I touched the camera at my chest, feeling the weight of knowledge it contained, evidence of a place beyond reality, beyond understanding. A place I had escaped, but would never truly leave behind. Because some roads, once traveled, stay with you forever. And sometimes, when I catch sight of an unmarked turn-off, or hear static on the radio that almost resolves into words, I wonder if part of me is still there, still driving that endless highway ring, searching for a way home. Have you ever heard wood bend and move without being touched? The kind of sound that can't be explained by settling foundations or the gentle sway of the wind? I've been the caretaker at St. Augustine's Lutheran Church in Millfield, Illinois for nearly 7 years now. The locals call me Father Marcus, though I'm technically just Pastor Marcus Richardson. I never correct them. Something about the formality provides a comfortable distance between my congregation and myself, a distance I've come to appreciate more with each passing day. St. Augustine's is a humble structure, built in 1923 by German immigrants seeking spiritual refuge in our quiet corner of the Midwest. The church itself is unremarkable, white wooden siding weathered by decades of harsh Illinois winters, a modest steeple that barely qualifies as such, and stained glass windows donated by families long since moved away or buried in our cemetery. But it's what lies above the sanctuary that haunts my nights, our attic. Most churches have bell towers or simple storage spaces above their ceilings. Ours houses something different. Something I've grown to dread each time the sun dips below the horizon. The angel arrived before my time, donated in the 1970s by an elderly woodcarver named Theodore Hoffman. The church records say little about him or why he gifted such an exquisite piece to our modest congregation. 6 feet tall with a wingspan equally impressive, the angel was carved from a single piece of oak. Its features are delicate yet somehow severe, eyes downcast in an expression that could be interpreted as either divine contemplation or profound sadness. The craftsmanship is remarkable, especially considering it was the work of one elderly man's hands. I never paid it much mind during my first years here. It was simply another church artifact, stored in the attic because it was too large and, frankly, too intense for our simple worship space. Something about those eyes seemed to follow you wherever you went. The first time I heard it was 3 months ago, during an unseasonably cold April night. I was working late in my office adjacent to the sanctuary when a sound like fabric being torn in half echoed through the empty church. Then came a rhythmic creaking, like wooden boards being bent against their will. I assumed it was vandals. Millfield might be small, but we're not immune to bored teenagers. I grabbed my flashlight and made a careful search of the premises. Finding nothing on the main floor, I reluctantly pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up. The beam of my flashlight cut through decades of dust particles hanging in the still air. Filed tax forms, Christmas decorations, and abandoned furniture created shadowy obstacles as I moved deeper into the space. And then my light caught those eyes. The angel stood in the far corner, exactly where it had been placed years before I arrived. Its wings were folded behind its back, hands clasped in prayer. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. But the air around the statue felt different, colder, somehow charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Just the building settling, I whispered to myself, the sound of my voice providing momentary comfort in the suffocating silence. As I turned to leave, I could have sworn I heard a faint rustling, like feathers being gently ruffled by a breeze. But the attic windows were sealed shut. That night, sleep eluded me. My dreams, when they came, were filled with the sound of creaking wood and the image of those downcast eyes slowly, painfully looking up to meet my gaze. The following morning, I convinced myself it had been nothing more than an old building making old building noises. But a part of me, the part that still believed in childhood monsters, urged me to check the attic again. The angel stood exactly as it had the night before. Except, no! That couldn't be right. I approached it slowly, my heart quickening with each step. The statue's hands, which I distinctly remembered being clasped in prayer, now hung at its sides. The change was subtle, something anyone else might dismiss. But I knew what I had seen. Mrs. Garrett, our elderly organist, found me standing there, staring at the wooden figure. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, making me jump. My father knew the man who carved it. Said he worked on it for 7 years, never letting anyone see it until it was finished. Claimed an angel came to him in a dream and demanded to be given form. I nodded absently, my eyes never leaving the statue's hands. The strangest thing, she continued, seemingly oblivious to my discomfort, my father said old Hoffman died the very night he completed it. They found him in his workshop, tools still in hand, with the strangest smile on his face. That night, I made sure to lock the attic hatch before leaving the church. As I turned the key, I couldn't shake the feeling that something on the other side was listening, waiting for me to leave. I should have trusted that instinct. Because that was the night everything changed, the night I first heard the unmistakable sound of wooden wings unfurling in the darkness above. They say the most profound terror comes not from monsters or violence, but from the realization that reality isn't what you believed it to be. In that flash of lightning, as the wooden angel's face tilted upward to reveal eyes that should have been just carved indentations, I experienced that exact terror. Because those eyes weren't empty. They held awareness. I stood frozen, the flashlight beam trembling across the figure's features. The angel's expression was no longer one of divine contemplation or sadness. No, what I saw in that carved face was hunger. "This isn't happening," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hammering rain. The statue remained motionless, wings extended, blocking my exit. But something about it had changed beyond the repositioning. The wood itself seemed different, less like dead, carved oak and more like something organic. The grain rippled subtly, like muscle beneath skin. Another flash of lightning. In that brief illumination, I could have sworn the figure stood closer than before, though I hadn't seen it move. My back pressed against the attic's far wall now, my options limited to non-existent. The rational part of my brain, the part still desperately clinging to seminary teachings and logical explanations, tried to assert itself. This was a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. A waking nightmare. Perhaps even a mental breakdown. But hallucinations don't create cold drafts that circle around your feet. They don't produce the scent of ancient wood and something else, something like copper and incense. What do you want? I found myself asking, immediately regretting it. Engaging with delusions only strengthens them, I reasoned. The statue remained silent, but the air around it seemed to vibrate with unspoken response. I don't know how long we remained locked in that standoff, me plastered against the wall, it blocking my escape. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The storm began to subside, the spaces between thunder growing longer, the rain softening to a gentle patter. And still, we remained motionless, a tableau of man and what? What was I facing? Just as my legs began to tremble from maintaining the same position for so long, my phone rang in my pocket. The sudden noise nearly caused me to drop my flashlight. The caller ID showed Thomas's number. "Pastor? It's Thomas again. Just checking that everything's all right. You seemed pretty shaken earlier." His voice was a lifeline to normalcy. I opened my mouth to cry for help, to tell him what was happening. But the words caught in my throat as I looked up to find the angel now directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine detail of its carved feathers, the delicate work around its eyes. Eyes that now outlined with terrifying intensity. "I'm fine," I managed to croak out. "Everything's fine. Thank you for checking." "You sure? You sound strange." The angel's head tilted slightly, as if curious about my deception. "Just tired," I said, the line now automatic. "Sorry for disturbing your night." After hanging up, I realized my mistake. The chance for help had passed. I was alone with whatever this thing was, this wooden creature that shouldn't be able to move, to think, to trap me. "Theodore Hoffman," I whispered, remembering the woodcarver's name. "Did he make you, or did you make him?" The question hung in the dusty air between us. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a sound I'll never forget, the grinding creak of wood as the statue's mouth, previously carved in a serene line, slowly opened. The movement was agonizing, each millimeter accompanied by the protest of splitting timber. No words emerged from that impossible mouth. Instead, what came forth was a rush of stale air carrying the scent of old churches, candle wax, and something underneath it all, something rotten. I pressed myself harder against the wall, wishing I could pass through it. The flashlight slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor but remaining lit, casting distorted shadows as it rolled. The beam came to rest pointing upward, illuminating the angel from below. The effect transformed its once serene face into a mask of otherworldly menace. Its wings, now fully extended, cast enormous shadows that seemed to engulf the entire attic. A desperate plan formed in my mind. The attic had 2 windows, small, but perhaps large enough for a man of my size to squeeze through if necessary. The drop to the ground would be dangerous, but preferable to whatever fate awaited me here. I began inching sideways, maintaining eye contact with the creature. Its wooden head pivoted smoothly to follow my movement, too smoothly for jointed wood, too precisely for a hallucination. "I don't know what you are," I said, hoping conversation might distract it, "but this church has stood as a place of worship for a century. Whatever your purpose, you can't." The angel's hand shot out with impossible speed, wooden fingers wrapping around my wrist. The touch was shockingly cold, and beneath the coldness, a subtle movement, as if the wood itself were pulsing. I cried out, more from shock than pain, and tried to pull away. The grip tightened, the pressure increasing until I felt the bones in my wrist grinding together. With my free hand, I clawed at the wooden fingers, my nails catching and breaking on the unyielding surface. The more I struggled, the tighter the grip became, until small sounds of splintering bone joined the creaking wood. Desperate, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy brass candlestick stored among the Christmas decorations, and brought it down on the angel's arm with all my strength. The impact reverberated up my arm, but I was rewarded with the sound of cracking wood. The angel's grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free, leaving splinters embedded in my bleeding wrist. I lunged for the nearest window, no longer caring about the danger of the fall. As my fingers fumbled with the rusted latch, a terrible screeching filled the attic, the sound of wooden wings cutting through air. The window finally gave way, cold night air rushing in as I pushed the pane outward. Behind me, I felt rather than heard the angel's approach, the floorboards groaning under its impossible weight. I managed to get my head and one shoulder through the window before wooden fingers tangled in my hair, yanking me backward with such force that stars exploded across my vision. As I fell back into the attic, into the waiting arms of the wooden angel, my last conscious thought was of the story Mrs. Garrett had told me, of Theodore Hoffman dying with a strange smile on his face after completing his masterpiece. Now I understood that smile. It wasn't satisfaction. It was relief. I awoke to the gentle pressure of morning sunlight on my closed eyelids and the distant sound of birds. For one blissful moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare, the moving statue, the wooden fingers around my wrist, the failed escape attempt. Then I opened my eyes. I was lying on the attic floor, dust motes dancing in the beams of sunlight streaming through the now open window. My body ached, particularly my wrist, which had swollen to twice its normal size and bore a ring of deep purple bruises in the unmistakable pattern of fingers. Not a dream, then. Sitting up sent waves of dizziness through me. How long had I been unconscious? A glance at my watch showed it was just past 7 in the morning. Marie would be arriving soon to open the church office. And the angel? I turned slowly, afraid of what I might see. But the wooden figure stood in its original corner, wings folded behind its back, hands clasped in prayer, eyes downcast in that familiar expression of divine contemplation. Exactly as it had been for decades before I ever arrived at St. Augustine's. The only evidence of our nighttime encounter was a hairline crack running down its right arm, precisely where I had struck it with the candlestick. On unsteady legs, I approached it, keeping a cautious distance. Nothing about it suggested movement or life now. It was just wood, intricately carved, beautiful in its craftsmanship, but just wood. But I knew better. I descended from the attic, locking the hatch behind me with trembling hands. In the harsh light of morning, everything seemed mundane, normal. The sanctuary was silent except for the familiar creaking of an old building settling. Marie found me in my office 20 minutes later, attempting to wrap my injured wrist. "Pastor Richardson," she exclaimed, rushing to help me. "What happened?" "Fell," I muttered, not meeting her concerned gaze. "Trying to fix a shelf at home." She didn't believe me, that much was clear from her expression, but she helped me finish the bandage without further questions. "The Johnsons called," she said as she worked. "They want to confirm you're still doing the blessing for their new house this afternoon." I had completely forgotten. The thought of performing a blessing, of invoking divine protection when my own faith felt so shaken, seemed almost laughable. But I nodded, not trusting my voice for more than single-word responses. The day passed in a haze. I went through the motions of my duties, returned phone calls, reviewed Sunday's sermon notes, met briefly with the church council about the leaking roof. The irony of discussing repairs to a space I now feared was not lost on me. All while my mind replayed the previous night's events on an endless loop. By late afternoon, I had convinced myself of several possibilities. I was experiencing a mental breakdown. The storm had somehow caused me to hallucinate. Perhaps I'd been sleepwalking and injured myself in confusion. Any explanation seemed more plausible than a wooden angel coming to life. The blessing at the Johnsons' new home went smoothly enough, though Emily Johnson asked twice if I was feeling all right. Apparently, my distraction was noticeable. I blamed it on a poor night's sleep, which wasn't entirely untrue. As twilight approached, I found myself driving back to the church rather than to my small house 3 blocks away. Some compulsion I couldn't name drew me back to St. Augustine's, back to the attic. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened. Most of all, I needed to know if I was losing my mind. The church was empty, the last volunteer having left hours ago. My footsteps echoed in the silent sanctuary as I made my way to the attic hatch, each step feeling heavier than the last. This time, I came prepared. A heavy mag light, a hammer, and, somewhat embarrassingly, a small vial of holy water I'd taken from the baptismal font. Whether for self-defense or exorcism, I wasn't entirely sure. The attic ladder creaked under my weight as I ascended, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet building. At the top, I paused, sweeping my flashlight across the familiar landscape of stored items. The angel stood exactly where it had this morning, exactly as it had been for decades. Motionless. Wooden. Inanimate. I approached it cautiously, noting that the crack in its arm appeared to have healed. No, that wasn't possible. It must have been a trick of the light, or perhaps my memory was faulty. "What are you?" I whispered, feeling foolish for addressing a statue but unable to help myself. Silence was my only answer. I studied it more closely now, my fear giving way to morbid curiosity. The craftsmanship truly was remarkable. Each feather on its wings was individually carved, each fold in its robes flowing naturally. The face, with its serene expression, showed the skill of a master artist. But something about the statue had always unsettled me, even before the previous night's events. Something in its proportions wasn't quite right, slightly too tall, arms a bit too long, features almost but not quite human. On impulse, I reached out and touched its hand. The wood was cool and smooth, just as one would expect. No movement, no pulsing sensation like I'd felt when it grabbed me. Just dead wood. Relief began to wash over me. Perhaps I had experienced some sort of episode. Maybe Thomas had been right about my exhaustion. This was just a statue, nothing more. Then my flashlight beam caught something unusual on the back of the angel's neck, partially hidden by its carved hair. A small symbol, no larger than a dime, had been carved into the wood. I leaned closer, trying to make out the design. It wasn't a cross or any Christian symbol I recognized. Instead, it appeared to be some sort of sigil, a triangle bisected by a curved line, with small notches around its perimeter. As my finger traced the outline of the strange marking, a sudden coldness enveloped the attic. Not the gradual coolness of evening, but an immediate drop in temperature that left my breath visible in the beam of my flashlight. The wood beneath my fingertip shifted. I jerked my hand back, stumbling away from the statue. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with the now familiar sound of creaking timber, the angel's head slowly turned, not toward me, but toward the attic window, where the last rays of sunset painted the dusty glass in shades of crimson and gold. Its movement wasn't aggressive or threatening. If anything, it seemed reverent, worshipful, even as it gazed at the dying light. Then, so softly I almost missed it, came a sound from the statue, not the cracking of wood or the rustle of phantom wings, but words. Words spoken in a voice like autumn leaves scraping across stone. He returns with the dark. Each word seemed to cause the statue physical pain to produce, the timbre of its throat visibly straining with the effort. Who? I managed to ask, my own voice barely a whisper. Who returns? The angel's head swiveled toward me with unnatural smoothness. Its carved eyes, which I could have sworn were solid with this morning, now held deep hollows, empty sockets that somehow still conveyed an emotion I couldn't quite name. Sorrow? Warning? Hunger? As the last ray of sunlight disappeared from the window, the statue spoke once more, its wooden lips barely moving. The one I was carved to contain. And then, as darkness fully claimed the attic, the wooden angel began to scream. The scream that issued from the wooden angel wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was the sound of something being torn apart from the inside, the agonized protest of matter being forced to accommodate something it was never meant to hold. I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight in panic. The beam spun wildly across the floor before coming to rest on the far wall, leaving me in semi-darkness with only ambient light from the window illuminating the horrific transformation taking place before me. The angel's wooden body was changing. Deep fissures appeared along its surface, not breaking it but somehow allowing it to expand. Its wings unfurled with a sound like sailcloth catching wind, stretching to dimensions that shouldn't have been possible in the confined space of the attic. Most terrifying of all, the cracks that formed across its face revealed not broken wood inside but a pulsing, membranous substance that glistened wetly in the dim light. "What are you?" I gasped, pressing myself against the wall, the hammer I'd brought clutched uselessly in my trembling hand. The statue's movements became more fluid with each passing second, less like wood and more like something wearing wood as a shell. Its head tilted at an impossible angle as it regarded me, the empty eye sockets now filled with something that caught what little light remained, something that gleamed like polished obsidian. "Not what," it corrected, its voice smoother now, though still carrying the underlying texture of splintering wood. Who? A terrible understanding began to dawn on me. Theodore Hoffman, I whispered. The woodcarver. The thing that was no longer simply a statue inclined its head in acknowledgement. Part of him remains, it conceded. A willing vessel, in the end. But mostly, me. It took a step toward me, its movements now almost graceful despite the cracking sounds that accompanied each motion. The wood of its feet splintered and reformed with each step, adapting to movement in a way carved wood never could. The church records, I said, my mind racing to piece together the fragments of the story Mrs. Garrett had shared. They said Hoffman died after completing you. Another step closer. A technicality, it said, something like amusement in its hollow voice. His body ceased to function, yes. But Theodore lives on. In here. It tapped its wooden chest, producing a sound not of solid oak but of something hollow and wet. What do you want? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Freedom, it said simply. This wooden prison has contained me for too long. I need more. Its obsidian eyes fixed on me with horrible intent. I need you, Marcus. The way it spoke my name sent ice through my veins. This thing knew me. Had known me, perhaps, since the day I first arrived at St. Augustine's. Had watched me from its corner of the attic all these years, waiting. I'm not Theodore Hoffman, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm not a woodcarver. I can't help you. Oh, but you can, it assured me, now close enough that I could smell the strange odor emanating from the cracks in its wooden skin, not rot or decay as I might have expected, but something sharper, like ozone before a lightning strike. Theodore was skilled with his hands, but you have faith. Faith is a much more valuable commodity for beings like me. What are you? I demanded again, gripping the hammer tighter, though I knew it would be useless against this thing. The angel's wooden face split in what might have been a smile, revealing not teeth but jagged wooden splinters arranged in a grotesque approximation of a human mouth. I've been called many things across many ages, it said. Angel. Demon. God. The names matter little. What matters is the exchange. Exchange? I repeated. Theodore wanted to create something transcendent, art that would live forever, it explained, gesturing to its wooden body. I gave him that. In exchange, he gave me form. A tether to your world. It looked down at its wooden hands, flexing the fingers that had nearly crushed my wrist the night before. Imperfect, limiting, but a beginning. I thought of Hoffman, found dead in his workshop with tools still in hand, and that strange smile Mrs. Garrett had described. Had he known what he was doing? Had he willingly invited this thing in? And me? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. What exchange do you propose? The wooden angel stretched its wings wider, filling the attic with the sound of cracking timber. You have spent your life speaking to the divine, Marcus. Calling out to powers beyond the veil. Its voice dropped lower, becoming almost tender. But has anything ever answered? Truly answered? The question struck a nerve, touched on doubts I had carried silently throughout my years of ministry. How many prayers had I offered that seemed to evaporate into nothingness? How many times had I promised my congregation that God was listening, while privately wondering if anyone was there at all? I am answering, the thing continued, its voice hypnotic now. I am here. Real. Tangible. Offering you certainty in place of faith. It extended a wooden hand toward me, not grabbing as it had the night before, but offering, inviting. "Join with me," it whispered. "Let me show you what lies beyond the veil. Let me give your congregation a true miracle, a divine presence they can see, touch, witness. Through you." For one terrible moment, I felt myself swaying toward its outstretched hand. The promise of certainty, of finally knowing rather than merely believing, was almost irresistible after a lifetime of faith without proof. Then my eyes fell on the small wooden cross I wore around my neck, a gift from my grandmother when I first entered seminary. A simple thing, crudely carved and unimpressive next to the artistry of the being before me, but genuine in its humble purpose. "No," I said, the single word cutting through the hypnotic tension that had been building in the attic. "Whatever you are, whatever you're offering, no!" The angel's expression shifted, the wooden approximation of a smile collapsing into something harder, colder. "You misunderstand," it said, all pretense of gentleness vanishing from its voice. "This isn't a request." It lunged forward with impossible speed, wooden hands outstretched toward my throat. I swung the hammer wildly, connecting with its shoulder. The impact sent splinters flying and knocked the creature off balance, giving me precious seconds to dart past it toward the attic hatch. As I scrambled down the ladder, I heard the thing moving overhead, its footsteps sending dust raining down through the ceiling panels. I ran through the sanctuary toward the main doors, fumbling with the keys with trembling hands. Behind me came the sound of splintering wood as the attic hatch burst open. I didn't look back. Couldn't bear to see what might be emerging. The keys slipped from my sweat-slicked fingers, clattering to the floor. As I bent to retrieve them, something heavy crashed into the back of my skull, sending me sprawling across the cold stone floor of the narthex. Dazed, I rolled onto my back to see the wooden angel standing over me, its wings fully extended in the high-ceilinged space of the church. In the moonlight streaming through the stained glass windows, I could see that its transformation had progressed even further, the wood now barely containing a shifting, undulating form within. "One way or another," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally in the empty church, "you will help me complete what Theodore began." As it reached for me, a desperate idea formed in my pain-addled mind. With the last of my strength, I kicked out at the base of the heavy stone baptismal font near the entrance. The ancient pedestal, already unstable from decades of settling foundation, teetered precariously. The angel lunged for me just as the massive stone font toppled over, crashing directly into its wooden form with a sound like an explosion. Water, stone, and splinters of wood flew in all directions. I scrambled to my feet, expecting the creature to reform, to continue its pursuit. But what remained among the wreckage of the baptismal font was only fragments of carved wood and a dark, viscous substance that seemed to be rapidly evaporating into the air, like water on hot stone, leaving no trace behind. From among the broken pieces, one remained intact, the angel's face, now just a wooden mask with empty eye sockets and that serene expression that had always disturbed me. As I watched, breathless and trembling, the last of the strange substance evaporated from behind it, leaving nothing but lifeless wood. For several minutes, I stood frozen, waiting for the fragments to reassemble, for the thing to reform and continue its pursuit. But the church remained silent except for the gentle dripping of baptismal water spreading across the stone floor. I approached the wreckage cautiously, nudging the largest wooden fragments with my foot. They behaved as wood should, shifting slightly under pressure, remaining inert. Just carved oak, nothing more. The face stared up at me from among the debris, its expression somehow different now. Was it my imagination, or did it look relieved? I remembered what the creature had said about Theodore Hoffman, that part of him remained within the wood. Had the woodcarver been trapped all these years, a prisoner in his own creation? Had I somehow freed him? Or had I simply banished the entity temporarily, sending it back to whatever realm it had come from? I didn't wait to find out. With shaking hands, I gathered every fragment of wood I could find, carrying them outside to the small maintenance shed behind the church. There, I found what I needed: gasoline for the lawnmower, matches for the sanctuary candles. The wooden pieces burned quickly, the flames consuming decades-old oak with unnatural hunger. I stood watch until dawn, adding each splinter and shard to the fire, ensuring nothing remained. The wooden face was the last to go. I hesitated before tossing it into the flames, struck by a momentary fear that it might speak again, might plead for mercy or threaten vengeance. But it remained silent, and the fire accepted it like all the rest. As the sun rose over Millfield, Illinois, I sat on the steps of St. Augustine's Lutheran Church, watching the last embers die in the metal trash can. My body ached, my wrists throbbed, and my faith, my understanding of the world and what might exist beyond it, had been irrevocably altered. That was 2 months ago. I told the congregation that vandals had broken in, destroying both the baptismal font and the old wooden angel statues stored in the attic. No one questioned this story. After all, why would their pastor lie? I still serve at St. Augustine's. Still deliver sermons each Sunday, still offer prayers and comfort to those in need. But something has changed in the way I speak of faith, of the divine, of what might exist beyond our understanding. There's a certainty in my words now that wasn't there before, not because I found proof of God, but because I encountered something else. Something that existed in the spaces between belief and doubt, between wood and flesh, between this world and elsewhere. The church feels different now. Lighter, somehow, as if a weight has been lifted from its very foundations. The attic remains empty. I've ensured that nothing is stored there, that the space sits clean and bare beneath the simple pitched roof. Sometimes at night, I still hear creaking above the sanctuary, but it's just an old building settling, nothing more. Just wood and nails and time doing what they've always done. At least, that's what I tell myself. But on certain nights, when the wind is still and the moon hangs heavy in the Illinois sky, I find myself staring up at the ceiling of my bedroom, listening. Not for the sound of creaking wood or fluttering wings, but for something else, the answer to a question I'm now afraid to ask. If that thing wasn't divine, what is? And more terrifying still, is it listening when I pray? Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.